I stood in my own son's backyard, holding a glass of lemonade nobody had offered me, listening to my daughter-in-law thank everyone in the world except the one person who made any of it possible. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I spent 34 years as a high school history teacher in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I coached junior varsity baseball on the side. I drove a truck that was 11 years old and proud of it. My wife, God rest her, used to tease me about clipping grocery coupons like it was a second job. We were careful people. We didn't waste. We planned. When my wife passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end, I found myself at 62 years old, retired, with a house that was paid off and a savings account that represented every vacation we'd postponed, every new car we'd decided against, every anniversary dinner we'd kept modest because there was always something more important to save for. The number in that account was substantial for a teacher from a small Ohio town. Not rich by any standard, but enough. My son is my only child. He was a good kid growing up, baseball, decent grades, a little too confident sometimes, but decent. He married his wife about 3 years ago. I was at the wedding. I liked her well enough at first. She was sharp, organized, driven. She came from a family in Connecticut that had considerably more money than I did, and I always sensed she was quietly aware of that gap. They settled in Charlotte, North Carolina. Good careers, both of them. My son works in logistics management. His wife works in marketing for a pharmaceutical company. Together they earn more in a year than I ever dreamed of making. About 18 months after they got married, my son called me on a Tuesday evening. That should have been my first signal. He usually texted. He said they'd found a house. A beautiful house, he said. A 4-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood that was coming up fast. The price was $460,000, and with their combined income they'd been pre-approved for a mortgage. But there was one problem. They were short on the down payment. Short by how much? I asked. He paused. Then he said the number. $340,000. I'll be honest with you. I did not say anything for a long moment. I just sat in my kitchen in Ohio, in the house where I raised him, looking at the calendar on the wall that still had my wife's handwriting on it, and I breathed. $340,000 was roughly 68% of everything I had saved over a lifetime of careful, deliberate, coupon clipping discipline. It was the money my wife and I had talked about using to go to Portugal someday, to finally take that train across Scotland, to see the things we'd always said we'd see when we had time. Time had run out for her. This was what was left. I asked him why they needed that much. He explained that they wanted to put down a large enough payment to keep the mortgage manageable, and that his wife's parents were contributing $60,000 toward furniture and renovations. They just needed the rest for the down payment itself. I asked him if he'd considered a smaller house. He said this was the one they wanted. I asked him if he understood what I'd be giving up to do this. He said, "Dad, I know it's a lot, but this is an investment. You'd be investing in our future, and we'll pay you back. I promise, every cent. I want to be very clear about something. I am not a man who does things halfway or without thinking. I told my son I would consider it, and I did. For 2 weeks, I thought about almost nothing else. I talked to my accountant. I looked at what I'd have left. I thought about my wife and what she would have said. What she would have said, I think, is this: be careful, get it in writing, and make sure he means it. So that's what I did. I called my son back and told him I would help them. But I had conditions. The money was a loan, not a gift. It would be documented with a formal promissory note drawn up by my attorney. The note would specify the total amount, the repayment timeline, and the interest rate, which I set at 2%, far below what any bank would have offered. I also told him that I expected to be kept informed about major financial decisions regarding the property until the loan was repaid. My son agreed without hesitation. His wife was less enthusiastic. She went quiet on the phone when he explained the terms to her, but she agreed too. My attorney drew up the paperwork. My son signed it. His wife signed it. I transferred $340,000 from my savings account into their account, and I watched the balance of what remained with the quiet, steady grief of a man who has just handed over more than he probably should have, for reasons that felt right at the time. They closed on the house in March. The housewarming party was in June. I drove down from Ohio by myself. 8 hours. I'd offered to come a few days early and help them set up, maybe see the house before it was full of people. My son said that wasn't necessary, that they had everything handled, so I booked a hotel. They hadn't offered the guest room, which I noticed but didn't mention. And I arrived the afternoon of the party. The house was beautiful. I'll give them that. Big craftsman porch, nice yard, new landscaping. They'd already done renovations. Marble countertops in the kitchen, a completely refinished master bathroom. I stood in the driveway for a moment before walking in, thinking about the number on that promissory note and trying to feel good about it. When I got to the backyard gate, there was a woman with a clipboard standing at the entrance. A hostess. She looked at me with a professional smile and asked if I could give her my name. I told her. She looked at her clipboard, looked again, looked up at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't see you on the list. I'm 63 years old. I have never in my life felt smaller than I did in that moment. Standing outside my own son's backyard at a party I had largely financed, being told by a woman with a clipboard that I was not on the list. I stayed calm. I told her I was the homeowner's father. She said she'd have to check. She stepped away and spoke quietly into her earpiece. A few minutes later, my son appeared at the gate, looking slightly flustered, and said there must have been a mix-up, and of course I should come in. There was no apology. Just, there must have been a mix-up. He went back to his guests. I walked in and got myself a glass of lemonade and stood near the edge of the patio watching. The party was impressive. Catered appetizers. A small string quartet in the corner. Probably 60 or 70 guests, most of them couples my son and his wife's age, dressed nicely, laughing loudly. Her parents were there. A tall man in a blue blazer and his wife, both clearly comfortable at this kind of event, moving through the crowd like people who'd attended many such gatherings. I had met them briefly at the wedding. We'd shaken hands and exchanged pleasantries. That was the extent of our relationship. About an hour into the party, my daughter-in-law called for everyone's attention. She was poised. I'll give her that too. She held a glass of champagne and she smiled at the crowd and she thanked everyone for coming to celebrate their new home. Then she started talking about what had made this house possible. She talked about hard work and vision. She talked about finding the right neighborhood and the right property. She talked about the renovations they'd done to make it truly theirs. And then she said that none of it would have been possible without her parents. She looked at her mother and father across the patio, and she said, "My parents believed in us and supported us with such a generous gift, and we are so grateful. This home is a reflection of everything they raised me to value." Her parents raised their glasses. The crowd applauded. She continued talking for another minute or so. She thanked a neighbor who had helped them with landscaping recommendations. She thanked a colleague who had connected them with their real estate agent. She thanked the contractor who'd done the renovations. She did not say my name. Not once. My son stood beside her the entire time, nodding. He glanced at me once, just once, and then looked away. I stood at the edge of that patio with my glass of lemonade, and I did not move. I kept my face neutral. I've been a teacher for 34 years. I know how to hold a face while something is happening inside me. What was happening inside me was this. I was doing the math. Her parents gave $60,000 for furniture and renovations. They were called generous. They were thanked publicly, warmly, in front of 60 people. I had given $340,000, nearly 6 times as much, and my name was not spoken aloud a single time. 68% of my life savings, my wife's dreams, her Portugal, her Scotland, all of it sitting in the equity of this house, and I wasn't even on the guest list. I stayed another 40 minutes, long enough that leaving wouldn't look abrupt. I said goodbye to my son, who gave me a hug and said, "Glad you could make it, Dad." His wife smiled at me from across the patio and gave a small wave. I smiled back. I drove to my hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed in my dress shirt, and I thought about my wife for a long time. I thought about the way she used to say, "Don't lend money you're not prepared to lose." She said it whenever we talked about anything financial, like a small recurring prayer. I had not listened. I thought about that promissory note sitting in my files back in Ohio. I thought about the fact that I had documentation. And then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. I want to be clear again, I did not call my attorney in a hot rage. I called him calmly and methodically, the way I do most things. I explained what had happened. I told him I wanted to understand my options. He asked me a few questions, confirmed the loan documentation was solid, and then walked me through exactly what initiating a formal repayment demand would look like. The following Monday, my attorney sent a formal letter to my son and his wife. It referenced the promissory note. It outlined the full loan amount, the agreed interest rate, and stated that in light of recent circumstances, the lender, that was me, was exercising the right to request repayment on an accelerated timeline, as specified in the note's default provisions. I had not told my son I was going to do this. His call came on Wednesday. He was not calm. He said this was blindsiding him. He said he thought we had an understanding. He said his wife was upset. He used the word betrayal, which I found interesting given the context. I listened to all of it. Then I said, quietly, that I wanted him to think back to the party, to the speech. I asked him to count in his memory how many times my name was said out loud in that speech. He was quiet. I said, "Your wife stood up in front of 60 people and thanked a contractor by name. She thanked a neighbor. She did not say my name once. I was not on the guest list to my own son's housewarming party. And $340,000 of my retirement savings is sitting in the equity of that house." He said it wasn't supposed to go like that. He said his wife had just been nervous and forgot. I said that was fine. People forget things. But I had a legal document, and I would like my money. Now here's the part people always want to know. Did I actually expect to get it back? Honestly, not fully, not quickly. I thought I might get a partial repayment and a lot of arguments. I was prepared for this to be a long fight. I was prepared for it to damage my relationship with my son, possibly permanently. And I had made peace with that because the alternative, being treated as though I was invisible, as though the sacrifice I made was nothing, as though my wife's dreams were just a resource to be used and discarded, was something I refused to accept in silence. But here is what actually happened. My son's wife's family had money, old, quiet money, the kind that doesn't like legal complications or public disputes. When my attorney sent the formal demand letter, and when it became clear I was not bluffing, her father apparently stepped in. I don't know all of what was said. My son told me later, in a different conversation, that his father-in-law had advised them strongly to resolve this cleanly. That man may be many things, but apparently he understood legal exposure when he saw it. 3 months after the letter was sent, I received a wire transfer, the full amount, principal plus the 2% interest, which I had not expected. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the transaction confirmation on my laptop for a long time. Then I made a cup of coffee and called my sister in Indiana and told her what had happened. She cried a little. I didn't, but it was close. The relationship with my son is not what it was. We talk, maybe once a month, short calls. He has never fully apologized, not in the way that would actually mean something. He said, "I'm sorry things got complicated once," which is not the same as, "I'm sorry I let you be erased." His wife and I are cordial in the way that two people who have looked directly at each other across an irreparable moment are cordial. We are polite. We are never warm. I think about what I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd been on the deed. My attorney had suggested it, and I'd waved it off because I didn't want to make the whole thing feel transactional, which is funny now given how it all turned out. If you're ever lending a child that kind of money, or anyone that kind of money, be on the deed or don't do it. That's the only lesson I have about the money itself. The other lesson is harder to put into words. There is a particular kind of pain in realizing that someone you love sees you primarily as a resource, not a person, not a father, a resource that can be accessed and, once accessed, quietly deprioritized. You can love someone and still find that out about them. You can grieve it and keep moving. With the money back in my account, I did something I had been putting off for 2 years. I called a travel agent. My wife had a list. She kept it in a small leather notebook, the kind with a strap that wraps around it. Places she wanted to go. Things she wanted to see. She'd had that notebook since before we were married. I found it in her nightstand after she died, and I put it in my desk drawer and I hadn't opened it since, because every time I reached for it I pulled my hand back. I opened it. Portugal was on the list. Sintra and Lisbon. A train journey through the Dorado Valley at harvest time. The Alentejo region, which she'd read about in some magazine and circled in pen. Scotland was on the list. The Highlands. A specific castle she'd seen in a photograph. The Amalfi Coast. Kyoto. A small town in Norway whose name I can barely pronounce. I booked Portugal first. 2 weeks, late September. I got a good hotel in Lisbon and rented a car for the countryside portion because that's what she would have wanted. She hated tour buses, liked to stop when something caught her eye. I went alone, which is a strange thing. Beautiful and sad in equal measure. I took the notebook with me. I sat at a cafe in Sintra on a bright morning, with good coffee and the hills all around me, and I thought about how much she would have loved this. And I let myself feel that without trying to resolve it into anything. I took photographs she would have liked, not the famous things, just the textures, cobblestones, painted tiles on old walls, the way light fell through a restaurant window onto a white tablecloth. When I got home, my sister asked if the trip had been worth it. I said yes. She asked if I was okay. I thought about standing at a backyard gate being asked if I was on a list. I thought about watching my son look at me once and look away. I thought about lemonade I hadn't been offered, and a speech that didn't say my name. And then I thought about Sintra, about that cafe, about the notebook still sitting on my bedside table now, with a small pencil check beside Portugal. Yeah, I said. I'm okay.